I can.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone to the Naturalist Hour. We're so glad you're here. Thank you so much for all of your donations to support us during this time. I just wanted to go over a few details of how we're running these talks. My name is Diane Lill. I'm the Education Director at ANS. I'm really glad to see all of you. I just muted everyone, but you should know, hopefully by now you've done enough of these Zoom calls that you know these little buttons for mute and video allow you to control whether you can be heard or seen. So you can control those on your own device. And at the very end, if you do want to ask questions or talk to Stephanie, you can unmute yourself at the end. But we just ask that everyone stay muted during the talk. If you want to ask a question at any time during the talk, you can look for the little symbol for the chat bar, and you can type your question right into the chat bar. Or, like I said, you can unmute yourself at the end of the talk to ask Stephanie a question. The other thing I wanted to point out is depending on what device you're on, you can choose how you view this webinar. So you can choose to see just Stephanie's face, or you can choose to see everybody, or you can choose to see just the presentation. But depending on your device, you'll have to click on these different waffles, squares, rectangles. This one that's circled in red, that's usually what I do. That way I see just the slides with Stephanie in the corner. But you can choose how you see it on your actual device. And now I am going to turn the floor over to Stephanie to talk about chasing butterflies in the Rocky Mountains.
Okay, so am I showing up for everybody on the talking screen? Oh, they can't answer.
Yeah, you're good, Stephanie.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay, so.
Yes, you're showing up.
All right, very good. So I'm Stephanie Mason. I'm Senior Naturalist at the Audubon Naturalist Society. And I would have to say I am one lucky human being. I work at the Audubon Naturalist Society. That's my sort of big amount of luck in life. But I also, 22 years ago, actually 21 years ago, got involved with a community science project monitoring butterflies in Rocky Mountain National Park. And I'll talk a little bit more about it during the slideshow. It was started by a friend of mine. And the lucky thing is that the Audubon Naturalist Society has continued to give me time to go out to Rocky Mountain National Park and continue this butterfly survey project. I am hoping to head out there in another couple of weeks and be there for July and August of this summer. It's a little uncertain. Things will be very different in the park. The place I stay will have a lot of different rules because of COVID-19. So a lot of it's still uncertain, but I'm grateful to ANS for giving me the time to go out there and let me research for July and August. So here is, I'm starting out with a slide. I'm going to really take you on a quick trip through the park. We're going to talk about butterflies, a little bit about plants, what makes this park special, but it's a trip for you through the park, and I'll be your guide. So this is a photo I took last year in early June. Actually the first one, but that's okay. Well, there we go. There had been a late snowstorm, and so what we're looking at here is the front range of Rocky Mountain National Park. So this is really the incredible range of mountains that comprise the bulk of Rocky Mountain National Park. Next. So just a little bit about Rocky Mountain National Park. You can read most of it, but it is 417 square miles, and it's in Colorado's Front Range Mountains. It was established in 1915, which means it's one of the oldest parks in our system, and it's already celebrated its centennial year. It straddles the Continental Divide, which means on the east side of the Continental Divide, which starts actually right at the Continental Divide, Poudre Lake becomes the headwaters of the Poudre River, which flows into the Platte, which flows into the Missouri, which flows into the Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. But if you go over the Continental Divide, you end up in Kawanichi Valley, and that's where the Colorado River starts. which works its way through the west and empties into the Pacific Ocean. The western side of the divide is wetter, and the eastern side of the divide is drier. So it affects the habitats and what occurs where in the park. Elevations run from 8,000 to over 14,000 feet. Montane, subalpine life zones in the park. And it is today the third most visited U.S. national park. Last year, 4.6 million people. It's sort of a good news, maybe bad news story. The good news is people are getting out, they're enjoying the parks, and a lot of people are coming, a very, very diverse audience compared to when I started going 20 years ago. The maybe not so good news is that the park really can't handle that many people, and there are backups at the entrance stations, sometimes 2 and 3 miles long, and parking lots get full, and they keep adding shuttles, and the shuttles are full, and people fight over parking spaces, and people, there aren't enough restrooms. So this year they're using a timed entrance system because of COVID-19, and who knows, they may stick with that because it will reduce the number of people in the park. Next. So Rocky Mountain National Park is a park of beautiful mountain meadows with a lot of spring wildflowers, actually summer wildflowers. This was taken on my Cache La Poudre transect, and there are actually more wildflowers than it looks like. It's just that the grasses obscure them all. Next. And it's a park of high mountain lakes. On the left is what's called Nymph Lake, and on the right is Emerald Lake, one of my favorite lakes. It's a 1.8-mile hike from the trailhead. I love to very quickly hike up there and back after a day in the field. And interestingly, it wasn't till after I took this picture and downloaded it that I realized why they call it Emerald Lake. Look at the color of that lake. It's great. Next. What really makes Rocky Mountain National Park special is that nearly 1/3 of the park is above tree line. So you can read it has one of the largest expanses of alpine tundra preserved in the U.S. And most importantly, it's made accessible to visitors by Trail Ridge Road. Next. Trail Ridge Road was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, like Skyland Drive, and it goes up and over the Continental Divide. It is, I believe, now I'm trying to think, 35, 40 miles, just a spectacular drive. You go from about 8,500 feet up and over 12,000 feet and then down onto the other side of the divide and Kawanichi Valley at about 9,000 feet. This is again early in the season. Nothing has started to green up on the tundra at this point. Next. But when you're driving over Trail Ridge Road, there are always lots of things to look at and take pictures of. I love the elk. This was again early last year, and the elk reminded me of reindeer. Not that I've ever seen reindeer, but I've seen pictures. And I must admit, I stopped and took a picture. I couldn't help myself. There was already an elk jam. The cars were already stopped, so I went ahead and took a picture as well. Next. Other wildlife that you see from Trail Ridge Road includes bighorn sheep. This is a male. You can tell from the curly horns. And also marmots. Marmots are high elevation groundhog or woodchucks. And believe me, there are lots of ram jams and elk jams. In other words, cars stopping along Trail Ridge Road to take pictures throughout the summer. Next. Another creature that you encounter high in Rocky Mountain National Park is a pika. Pikas are also sometimes called coonies. They're found worldwide. They live in high elevation rock slides. And they're not a rodent, which most people think they are. They're a rabbit relative. They've become sort of the poster child for wildlife and the effects of climate change on wildlife. They live in high elevations. They stay fairly active all winter, semi-active. They're in torpor. They store food over the winter, which they periodically awaken and eat. But if it's too warm and there's not enough snow and spring comes, and they're stirred all winter, they will eat up their food before there's new vegetation available. And if you're a pika, you don't have anywhere to go. There's no up anymore if you're already at 12,000 feet. Next.
I just wanted to pop in, a couple of people said they can't see the slides, but everyone should be able to see the presentation. It's like a PowerPoint, I'm screen sharing. So if for some reason you're not seeing it, you might want to click on the different like waffles, squares, little boxes, try the settings on your device. Like if you're just seeing Stephanie's face, you should be seeing the screen. I just wanted to check if like Sarah Nell and Kristen, just to make sure this is working. Sorry.
It's working for me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can see, so, okay.
Okay, and also just so everyone knows, I'm recording it. So if there was some technical issue, you can view the whole recording later on as well. Sorry, Stephanie. Just
no problem. All right, next. Probably the most sought after and actually studied bird in Rocky Mountain National Park is white-tailed ptarmigan. You can see the white-tail there. It's special because it spends the entire year in the alpine zone in the park. It's an endemic to North America. And what's incredible is this is its summer plumage. So it blends in very well with the lichen-covered rocks. In the winter, it turns all white, except for the dark eye and the dark bill. And it feeds on the buds of the dwarf willows that are found at high elevation. It also grows a lot of feathers on its feet. So it effectively has its own snowshoes. And at night, it simply dives down into the snow and allows the snow to be a blanket until the morning when it can go out and forage again. But it has been studied, and you can see that the nesting period is moving forward. Next. When we move down in elevation, of course, there's more charismatic wildlife. Who can resist the chance to stop and take a photo of a moose and her calf? At least I couldn't. Moose were quite uncommon when I started surveying in the park 20 years ago. Now there are probably too many of them, and they're doing a lot of studies to try to see how they might reduce the population because they're browsing out the willows. Before, the elk were browsing out the willows, and then they did culling, and now the moose are browsing out the willows. So we'll see what happens next. Next. There are other more or less charismatic mammals. There are a lot of squirrels in the park. This is a chicory or red squirrel, and there are a couple of other tree squirrels, and then lots of ground squirrels, chipmunks, and golden mantled ground squirrels. And there are black bears. There are no grizzly bears. I would not do research in a park with grizzly bears. But black bears pretty much don't want to be bothered. A sow might be annoyed if you walked between her and her cub, but I've never had any kind of worrisome encounter with bears. I mean, I basically don't see them. I see their droppings in the fall full of cherries. But notice this bear is sort of reddish. We call this a cinnamon black bear. Next. I think birds are pretty charismatic. The photos I'm showing here aren't particularly bright and bold. That's because I only have the photos I could take with my point and shoot camera. And there are a lot of more colorful birds, but the dusky grouse is a montane or low elevation bird. Clark's nutcracker, we're going up to subalpine, and it's a cousin to the blue jays. So it's quite noisy, like blue jays. It doesn't actually crack open nuts. It uses its bill to pry out seeds from the cones of the limber pines. So it's like a tweezers to pull out pine seeds. And the rosy finch on the right is a nester up on the alpine or the tundra. It's pretty uncommon, another sought after bird in the park. It does move down and spends the winter in the grasslands and the plains. So it nests high, but it winters low. Next. Well, if you send a naturalist out to look for butterflies, you know she's going to look at everything. So beetles, spiders, and other invertebrates always catch my eye, whether it's mating soldier beetles or the flies in the gentian. I don't know if you can see in the middle there, it's called bottle gentian or Perry's gentian. There are flies in there. There's a crab spider on the Colorado columbine and a sweat bee on the Agosaurus. It's a native dandelion type cousin. Next. And of course, they're butterflies. 141 species of butterflies have been documented in Rocky Mountain National Park. There are bigger butterflies like the butterfly on the left, which is called Wiedemeyer's Admiral. You can see it's got its proboscis out and it's imbibing the fluids and minerals and uric acid salts from the mud. On the right-hand side is the Arctic blue. There are a lot of little blue butterflies. In fact, about 17 species of little blue butterflies that are very hard to tell apart. You have to look at the upper side, the lower side, when are they flying, where are they flying, and hope you can get them in your net so you can take a closer look. Next. There are butterflies in very subdued colors, like the hoary kama on the left. This is a cousin to the eastern kama that we have here in the DMV area. There's the little wood nymph on the right, very common and abundant in August. Next. And there are showy butterflies. On the left is a juniper hair streak, which actually juniper hair streaks are in the mid-Atlantic. We also have them in our area, but I love the contrasting color against the wild rose. And on the right is a ruddy copper. Next. There are early season species and late season species. So on the right is a species called Western Pine Elfin. This is one of the earliest butterflies to be flying in Rocky Mountain National Park. It starts flying in May and it'll fly through early June. Its caterpillars feed on, guess what? Pine, all right? And there are a couple of kinds of pine. This adult butterfly is actually not on pine. It's sitting on a spruce, but it's just hanging out. To the left, so this is one of the earliest butterflies on the wing in Rocky Mountain National Park. But on the left is, guess what? A pine white. So here's another butterfly whose caterpillars feed on pine needles, which boggles my imagination how a caterpillar can eat pine needles. But apparently they do, and they thrive because they then metamorphose into these amazing butterflies. But the pine white is the last butterfly species in the park to emerge and be on the wing. And it emerges about the middle of August and is on the wing through September. So there are some butterflies that have multiple generations and they're flying in August, but this one doesn't emerge at all until August and flies into September. Pine white and Western Pine Elfin. Next. There are even some familiar butterflies like the mourning cloak, which again is another butterfly species we have in the mid-Atlantic and the DMV. This butterfly overwinters as an adult butterfly. So what you're looking at overwintered behind bark. And since it's already an adult, when things start to warm up, it can jump onto the wing early. And here it is nectaring on willow flowers. Next. But I'm going to have to say the Rocky Mountain Parnassian, this is my favorite butterfly in the park. It's my vote for being the butterfly ambassador. And I don't know why they don't sell t-shirts with this butterfly on it. You know, they sell t-shirts with rams, with elk, with coyotes, but why not a t-shirt with a Rocky Mountain Parnassian on it? It flies throughout the park in all elevations. It's resident, montane, subalpine, and alpine. So a very adaptable generalist, as is its host plant, Yellowstone crop. Next. So of course there are a lot of plants in the park. If you've got butterflies, there have to be plants around because butterflies are connected to plants in all stages of their life. I don't think any of the butterflies use this spectacular trio of orchids. These are called calypso orchids or fairy orchids or fairy slippers. They emerge early in the season, in early June. What you can't tell from looking at this picture is that the stem of the orchid is only 2 to 8 inches tall. I took this picture laying on my stomach. Next. Plant lovers will know that in many areas, like our area, for instance, gentians are uncommon to rare, but in Rocky Mountain National Park, there are 14 different species of gentians, including the fringed gentian on the left and a species called the Arctic gentian on the right. The Arctic gentian, the white one, when it starts to bloom, you know the season is almost over, as almost all of the tundra plants have already bloomed and set seed, gone to fruit, foliage turning red. The Arctic gentian finally starts to bloom. And then, like I said, you know, the season's almost over. Next. There are showy plants like Mariposa lily, that's on the left, and shooting star. Next. And there are many, many species of nectar-rich asters and their relatives, which feed adult butterflies. So there are asters, there are erigerons, there are a lot of daisy species, a lot of goldenrod species, many, many species in the Asteraceae or composite family, nectar-rich sources for all the species and abundance of butterflies in the park. Next. And of course, there are woody plants in the park. I'm not going to go through very many of them, but show you the extremes. There are big pines. This is a big ponderosa pine. Ponderosa pines are the big pines of the low elevation. Looking at this pine, and you see how big it is, it tells you that, first of all, the tree is getting a lot of light, must be getting plenty of water, and it must have a really long growing season to be this big and robust. On the other hand, to the right, we have a willow. There are many species of willows in the park. The willows that are in the low elevation can be 15, 20 feet tall, but if you're a willow and you're growing in the alpine zone or the tundra, you're probably going to be 2, 3, 4 inches high, maybe 5 inches. You're dealing with a short growing season. You're dealing with really strong winds and also dry conditions. So you want to stay low to the ground and maintain some kind of humidity and not be buffeted by the wind. Next. So a little bit about the project. I'll let you read it here, but Rich Bray was the person who started it in 1997. I joined the project in 1998 as a friend and a volunteer and was able to go out for a couple weeks in June and August. And I continued doing that through 2011. Rich Bray then decided he no longer wanted to manage the project. We had quite a few volunteers, although near the end there were only a half dozen of us doing it. So I got my own permit and I am now carrying on the surveying, but not with more. I have 6 transects because I'm doing it myself. And right now I've just been doing late May, early June and August. But this year, thankfully, happily, hopefully, I'll be out there for the month of July because there are a lot of butterflies on the wing in July, and they have not been surveyed since 2011. So if you look, you can see I have a couple of montane transects and subalpine, and then 2 alpine transects. Next. So what is the purpose of the study? Create baseline data on butterflies, their relative abundance. In other words, how many are there? If you go out and you see Mormon fritillaries, how many are there? Are there 10 in a day? Are there 100 in a day? That's what abundance is, numbers, and species diversity is pretty self-explanatory. So the original study had more transects, which were established more or less randomly, but also to represent different habitats and different elevations, and to represent also both east side and west side of the Continental Divide. Again, now I'm only doing 6 transects. They were the 6 transects that were monitored the most regularly over the first 15 years of the project, and they have the best abundance, the best diversity, the best transects to monitor for change. Another purpose is to create long-term baseline information. So maybe I do it another 4 years and then I stop. But then maybe 15 years from now, somebody else wants to do it and they have baseline information. You can't really quantify change if you don't have some kind of baseline information to compare the present to the past. And Rocky Mountain National Park's a good study area. It has a broad range of protected habitats, has a lot of elevational gradations. Again, we're going from 8,000 feet. Well, I'm not surveying at 14,000 feet, that's for sure, but I am surveying over 12,000 feet. So that's a lot of elevational gradient, a lot of changes in the moisture level, and again, east and west side of the Continental Divide. Next. Why butterflies? Well, they're particularly good bioindicators since in all stages of their life, they're tied to plants in their environment. Plus, butterflies are colorful and easy to observe, and indeed, they're often called gateway insects for people who maybe are a little spooked by insects or don't know where to get started. Butterflies are great because here's the next thing, they don't bite and they don't sting. So that also makes them a nice study subject, I will have to say. I don't have to worry about being getting a wasp bite or being stung. And then the other thing that's important is they fly during the day. A number of people have asked me if I ever thought of studying moths, and the answer is no, because I like to sleep at night and I love to get up and spend the day in the field. So the butterflies are very good. Insects in general are good bioindicators, but butterflies in particular because of their connection to plants. Next. So this is really what makes it all possible for me to do this study. This is an old ranch, a dude ranch that was converted into residential housing for researchers. It is now called the Continental Divide Research Learning Center. And my cabin is cabin number 3. The big building is the main house, and then to its left is one, and then there's a little log cabin that was the very original building on this property, and then my cabin is sort of being hidden by the trees there. But this is the cabin I hope to be in by the end of the month, and this is the research facility where I stay each time that I go out there. There's a creek that runs right in front of it. It's hidden by all the willows, but it's called Cow Creek. So Cow Creek flows into the Poudre, I believe. And then, then we go on down the line to eventually ending up in the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. All right, next. So the Continental Divide Research Learning Center is the official name of the residential facility. We just all call it McGraw Ranch. Like to think we're out there at the ranch. Read that first quote. I love it. This is when it opened up. And I love the line, "A telephone and a winding mountain road are the only connections with the outside world." Well, at one time, of course, that was true. And even when I first started staying out there, probably at about 2005, there was no Wi-Fi there and no phone connection. You had to jump in your car and drive up to a hill that was nearby so you could get coverage. And the only place to do computer work was in the library in town. But, everybody now expects Wi-Fi and everybody has smartphones or cell phones. I still don't get coverage at the ranch, but when I'm in town, I can use my phone. And I must admit, it's nice not to have to go work in the library. And I would say I still feel as though I'm thousands of miles away from any settlement. I can see the Milky Way at night, and it's a wonderful place to be. Kansas Governor Alf Landon, as soon as it opened, he took over the whole ranch and ran his presidential campaign from there, that he wanted to live the flannel shirt life. He lost the election badly to Roosevelt, but I'm guessing he and his family had a great summer at the ranch. And you can read the last statement that talks about the goal and the mission of the Continental Divide Research Learning Center. Next. So here's what goes on after dinner. And you can see that most folks are at the lower end of the spectrum. Most of the researchers are graduate students, and they're often working on their master's or their PhD, mostly master's students. Bill, who is at the left end, he and I are the oldsters, and Bill is the caretaker, and I'm the oldest researcher there. We have a great time. However, this year is going to be very different. We will not be out sitting on the porch like this, that's so close together. So it's going to be a disappointment. The social value of sitting around after a day in the field and talking science with fellow researchers is so rewarding. But we can still sit on the front porch. We're just going to have to sit 6 feet apart. Okay, next. So it is the Alpine Life Zone, the tundra, that is my favorite life zone in Rocky Mountain National Park. I'm not sure why. Maybe because it's just so different from anything I grew up with or anything I live with here in the Mid-Atlantic, where forests are the major habitat. And I love being able to see 360 degrees, and I don't know, I love the sky. Anyway, so I'm going to focus a little bit on alpine butterflies for the last bit of this talk. Next. Tundra. So we often say alpine tundra or just tundra or just alpine. Tundra is actually a word of Russian origin meaning land without trees. It's not completely true that it's without trees. If you look at the left-hand picture, that's me with my net. What's under my shadow is a willow. This is in late August, and the willows turn beautiful orangey yellow up on the tundra. And this is, in fact, a tree. It's just that the elements have effectively sort of beaten it down so much that it grows as a spreading plant. And if you look close enough, you can actually see it has woody stems. To the right is a subalpine fir that has also been sculpted and truncated by wind and snow. So At lower elevations, a subalpine fir might be 25, 30 feet tall, but up in the what's called crumholts, which is where subalpine and alpine come together. Crumholts means crooked tree or crooked stick. You can see that the trees are shaped to the environment. Next. This is one of my transects above tree line, although this would be considered crumholts. You can see there are subalpine firs in the background. There are a lot of grasses, 11.5 feet in elevation, mostly rocky, mostly dry, although snow stays in this draw until really the end of August. So it's pretty wet, and sometimes in early August, I still have to go through snow in the middle there. Next. This is my highest transect. It's called Lava Cliffs. You can see the cliffs. This is volcanic rock. There are mountains to the west called the Never Summer Range, and they're volcanic in nature. There were explosions. They spit all sorts of volcanic matter back to the east, and they settled into these spectacular cliffs at 12,250 feet in elevation. This is what it looks like in early June. Once or twice I have been able to, enough snow has melted that I've been able to go up on this transect by the middle of June, but typically it opens up in July, which is why I'm looking forward to being out in July this year, and it's completely open in August, of course. Next. So here's what Lava Cliffs looks like when I normally come out in August. You can see that there's still a big snowbank, but I can do my transect along the ridge. I carry a net. I have a special permit to carry a net since there are a lot of look-alike species, and I, in some cases, need to do net and release. There's a radio in my right-hand pocket there. That's very important. When you see the rocks, I have to do rock hopping. You know why I carry a radio, just in case I slip. I have to identify myself as a volunteer with my badge. I carry a permit at all times and do my best to stay safe. Next. This is one of last year's interns, Vishva. She went up with me one day and she wanted to take pictures, and I took a picture of her. This is what it's like up there. It's a bunch of rocks and some grasses in between the rocks. A lot of this is volcanic. Parts of it is something called rhyolite, and you really need to do rock hopping. But you get pretty good at it once you do it as regularly as I do. But I'm careful. Next. This is the back side of that transect. So a transect, by the way, is a kilometer long, so 0.6 of a mile. And the back end of the transect, I end up at the upper end of the Fall River Cirque. If you look to the back, those are mountains to the west in Wyoming. Next. Field challenges for monitoring alpine species of butterflies. The wind, the average wind in the alpine is going to be 20 miles an hour. It can be higher than that. I have had a couple times when I've been up and the wind got so strong that I just went down. I was afraid I was going to be blown over. I would most certainly not go up if it was 35 miles an hour or more. Temperature, July is the warmest month, and the average temperature in July is 50. Clouds. It's most common in the mountains, particularly in July and early August, for clouds to start moving in from the west between the hours of 11 and 3. It's not the best timing because my survey time period is 10 to 2. So I have a lot of days when I go out and get clouded out. Or what's worse is if thunderstorms actually move in, or lightning. Lightning is probably my biggest threat in the park, especially when I'm above tree line. I'm very respectful of lightning, and if it looks at all like serious clouds are moving in, I will get down from on high very quickly. It's a lot of hail. There's a lot of grapple. What's grapple? Think of it as slushy hail. When hail hits the ground, it bounces. When grapple hits the ground, it goes splat. There are rocky and unstable walking surfaces. You can see what happens to a pair of hiking boots. I had glued these hiking boots. I had taped them up, and they still fell apart one day while I was hiking. So I had some extra shoelaces in my backpack, and I tied them up. There are large mammals above tree line, elk, which can be an issue, and then adhering to the protocol, and I'll talk about that next. Of course, the field challenges that affect me also affect butterflies. I mean, they have to deal with the wind and the temperature and the grapple. They don't have to deal with the pollard count, though. So here's my surveying protocol. It is based on a protocol that the British established, somebody named Pollard, and it is a single surveyor moving. So I have to be moving as I'm counting and identifying butterflies in this 5-meter cube, which Vishva did a great schematic of. And I have to do it between 10 and 2. While I'm doing this, the 5-meter cube means I can record butterflies 5 meters in front of me, 5 meters above my feet or above the ground, and 2.5 meters on either side of me. So that's that cube that's moving with me. Those are the butterflies on my transect. Anything else is off my transect. I record times, sun, date, week, percentage of blooms, and again, my kilometer is 0.6 miles long. Next. Let me do a real quick butterfly life cycle lesson, because when you think of these butterflies spending their life, the species that spend their whole life cycle up in the alpine, it's pretty incredible. So I'm going to start with the egg, all right? So most butterflies lay their eggs on the host plant being the plant that their caterpillars will eat. And most butterflies lay it on the host plant, so as soon as the egg hatches, the very teeny tiny first instar caterpillar has its food right there. Sometimes it's a lot of eggs on one leaf, sometimes it's one. This is a horikama egg. Next. Next stage, of course, are the very hungry caterpillars, or larva is the scientific term. If you look on the left-hand side, you can see there's a silvery blue caterpillar looking very much like the seed pod of the lupin. It feeds on lupin. And I love how the shape of the caterpillar approximates the shape of the seed pod. If you look closely too, you might see there is an ant. There's an ant on the caterpillar. And a lot of the so-called blue butterflies, the whole group of the gossamer wing butterflies, are tended by ants. Ants work to protect them. And so like if a parasitic wasp came up close to the butterfly, the caterpillar, the ant would reel up and try to defend. It's like a guard dog. And in exchange for being a guard dog, the caterpillar exudes a honeydew to feed the ants. So ants do a lot of tending of the blue butterfly caterpillars. And here's a good example and evidence of it happening. The pupa or the chrysalis, I love this one. Doesn't that look, that chrysalis on the right-hand side, doesn't that look like a thorn? What good cryptic camouflage. Next. And then, of course, the adult butterfly emerges from the chrysalis and feeds on plants. They're nectar feeders. So instead of eating leaves, they're feeding on the nectar from the plants. On the left-hand side is another Arctic blue feeding on a bistort. And on the right-hand side is a variable checker spot nectaring on moss campion. Next. Here are a few of the alpine wildflowers, which are just lovely. They're They're really, they start the last week of June and really run through maybe the middle of August, depending, but sometimes the year goes very quickly. Yellowstone crop on the right, or on the left, I'm sorry. Right upper is alpine primrose. And, you know, I'm not sure you can tell, but the stems on those alpine primrose are maybe, they're not even a half an inch. They are really, really short. One big flower and one very, very short stem. And then the lower right-hand corner is something called short flower paintbrush. Next. So alpine wildflowers might be described as diminutive, and they are small and even dainty, but they're really scrappy plants from a survival and an evolutionary point of view. They have very reduced leaves, very small leaves, because if you have big leaves, you lose a lot of moisture during the process of photosynthesis. So they have very tiny leaves, but they may have lots and lots of them. The alpine forget-me-not, the blue flower, the leaves are so tiny you can hardly see them, but they're many, many. They're about the size of a stick pin head. The alpine wildflowers also hug the ground, so they're what we call mat plants. They have really large root masses. 90% of the biomass in cushion plants is actually underground. And so they have a short growing season. They try to photosynthesize, generate as much energy and store it as carbohydrates or starch in a very, very deep root. There's one plant called, it's Claytonia megarrhiza. It's the like deep-rooted spring beauty, and the root goes down something like 3.5 feet. And the plant itself is only a couple of inches, but it has this really incredibly deep root. Many of them are hairy to better trap the sun's energy and convert it to heat and reduce moisture loss. They survive on as short a growing season as 42 days. Most are perennials. There is one annual that grows in the alpine zone in Rocky Mountain National Park, and it's called Conidia islandica. It's a circumboreal plant, and here's the interesting thing about this. So it's an annual, which means the seeds germinate in the spring, it blooms, sets seeds, and dies back within that 42-day period. It grows in areas where there is continuously a little trickle of water, so areas where there's snow melt, and the water can't be warmer than 43 degrees or the seed will not germinate. So if things start warming up faster, there's a concern that Conidia may wink out because the temperatures of that flowing water might be more than 43 degrees. So it's interesting. We think of a seed germinating if the water is warmer, but this seed will only germinate in cold water. And these plants survive incredibly extreme conditions. Next. So let me run through some of the butterflies that are these high elevation species that I'm so respectful of. Here's the Rocky Mountain Parnassian, the male on the left, female on the right. You might think, why would a high elevation butterfly be white? Well, look at the body. The body is covered with many dark hairs. So if you've got white on your wings, when you're at rest, you can hold your wings up sort of in a triangle or a dihedral, and the sun's light energy comes, hits your white wing, and then it bounces it down to your body, which is covered with dark hairs. And inside that body, of course, are the flight muscles, and it warms up the flight muscles and allows them to be able to fly in at low temperatures. So the female is really in that solar collector or that solar thermal regulation pose right there. Next. Can you find the Rocky Mountain Parnassian in this picture? So this was a really windy day. In fact, it was last summer, and I was way high up. I was over 12.5, I believe. It was very windy, and this butterfly was so hunkered down and sunning itself, but basically trying to stay out of the wind, but stay low enough that it didn't get blown away, but stay warm enough so that the minute the wind stopped, it would have warm flight muscles and it can start foraging again. It's down near, if you didn't find it, you probably did, but it's down near the bottom of the page, right in the center. Next. The rock slide alpine, or the Magdalena alpine. So now we've got an all black butterfly. And this butterfly is great at harnessing the sun's energy, absorbing that radiant energy from the sun and converting it into heat energy. It also allows it to hide very well in the dark recesses or crevices between rocks, and you really don't see it. Next. The Melissa Arctic is very cryptically colored. It reminds me a little bit of the plumage of the ptarmigan. Look how much that pattern looks like the lichens on the rock. It also blends in very well to keep it out of the hungry jaws of things like ravens, which spend a lot of time foraging for butterflies up high, or pipits, or horned larks, or even mountain bluebirds. A lot of birds forage for insects up on the tundra, and it's protected by this camouflage, cryptic coloration. Next. And then we have, in contrast, a butterfly that's yellowish green on the underside and bright orange on the upper side. But it survives quite well. It's possible, the underside is pretty green. It's possible if a bird comes up close, I'm guessing then that Mead sulfur flashes open its wings and it startles the predator and maybe can fly away. Look how little the plant is that it's nectaring on. That's called what's it called? A sunspot, Tonestus lyalii. And I think the stalk of the flower isn't even a ½ inch. It is so low to the ground. The butterfly is bigger than the flower. Next. There are a couple of species that actually probably breed and overwinter in subalpine, but take advantage of nectar resources up in the alpine during July. Mormon fritillary is one of them. Next. And its smaller cousin, the lesser fritillaries, the Arctic fritillary, also can sometimes be seen at the lower edges of the alpine zone. Next. And then once again, the Arctic blue, the little blue butterfly that I showed you earlier. And look who's sharing that senecio. There are lots of senecios too, or pacaras, ragworts in the park. Look who's sharing that flower cluster. That's a moth. It's a pterophorid moth or a plume moth. So they're both nectaring during the day. Next. And the last of the butterflies, this is a grizzled skipper. It actually takes 2 whole years for this butterfly to go from egg to adult. So there are 2 growing seasons for the caterpillar activity. And in Rocky Mountain National Park, it's all synced so that it only flies in odd years. And so this year, I won't see it on the wing, but I might encounter the caterpillars eating. Next. There are also some other lower elevation butterfly species that you can see up high, and they fly up. Mostly they're opportunistic for mating, for feeding, dispersal, or just their vagabond species. It's sort of their their pattern of living to fly up and over the mountains. Next. The climate change challenges for alpine species of butterflies, drought, very significant. I mean, that's a really significant concern, because if there's drought, all the nectar resources will dry up very quickly. And because it's so high and there's so much wind, if there is a drought and less rain, then things are going to dry up very quickly because of the wind and the solar radiation. Warming temperatures, obviously, extreme temperatures and temperature swings, low snow cover is a problem. One of the worst things that can happen to a butterfly overwintering is that it dries out. It gets freeze-dried, in other words. So that's true for all insects over the winter. They don't want to desiccate or dry out, and snow actually maintains moisture in their body. It also modulates temperatures and keeps them even. And then, of course, plant community changes, and you know all of those characteristics or all those challenges, because that happens at low elevations as well. Next. So, what are the lessons we have learned from these years of monitoring? When I go out in 2 weeks, it'll be my 22nd summer. The project started 1 year before that. So we've been doing a lot of work out there. What are the lessons we've learned? Well, the first one is sort of a joke. You can't put a radio collar on a butterfly. A lot of the research in Rocky Mountain National Park is on big mammals. And so the way they monitor elk populations and moose populations and mule deer populations and cougar populations is to put a radio collar on them. But you can't do that with the butterfly, at least not yet. Butterfly surveying efficiency and efficacy are weather dependent. You know, if I go out and an hour into my transect, it clouds over, it starts raining, it's too windy, I gotta wait till the next day. So, whereas if you're monitoring elk, you can sort of go out in any kind of weather. Birds, pretty much. Plants, certainly you can go out in any kind of weather. So it's very weather dependent, which can be very frustrating. Butterflies can respond quickly to weather events. So if you have a drought year 1 year, then the next year you might see population drops, but they can also recover quickly. So the following year after that, they may recover pretty well. So you want to continue to monitor over a long period of time. Many species of butterflies go through natural population buildups. So it's sort of like the cicadas do. They actually, there are, low numbers of cicadas except for that huge emergence when they try to overwhelm the predators, as it were, and then the population more or less crashes for a while. So there are quite a few butterflies that go up, 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 crash, and then they build up again. What we did have found out is that overall abundance appears to be declining for many species. So this doesn't mean species are disappearing, but when I survey the Pooter transect, instead of seeing the usual 60 Mormon fritillaries in the middle of August, I'm seeing 30, maybe 50% lower. Many national and international studies are showing the same thing for insects generally. The question is, for me certainly, is maybe the butterflies are flying earlier. Maybe they're flying in July. So that's why it's very important for me to be out there for July to see if the abundance is the same, but it's moved forward chronologically, and it's now higher in July. Another lesson, it's Rocky harbors a diverse assemblage of butterfly species. There were 95 species when we started the project. We documented many more species, and we now know 141 species have been recorded in the park, beginning with the 95, some of which, and there were about, I think, 17 species that we didn't see in the years that we have monitored, but they had been documented before. But we added a lot of species that had not been documented, obviously. And there are about 150 documented species of butterflies in Maryland, covering many more square miles. But a lot of those 150 are no longer in the state. They've been extirpated. I asked Rick Borchelt, he said there are probably about 110 species that one can find if you look really hard in the state of Maryland. Next. So continued monitoring is planned as long as Rocky Mountain National Park continues to give me a permit to do it. And right now I think they want to, because I'm one of the few really long-term projects. Graduate students tend to do 1 or 2 years, maybe 2, and then they move on. So they really like having a long-term monitoring project. I'll continue to track butterfly community associations, looking for presence, absence, long-term changes in flight periods. Want to see how many low elevation species move up into the park and see if there are changes in plant populations. Next. So as a naturalist and educator, I'm certainly grateful to Rocky Mountain National Park and of course to my employer, Audubon Naturalist Society, for giving me the time off to go out to the park. But I thank the park because they're supporting research on a species other than the traditional megafauna. And I will have to say for myself, I have never encountered a butterfly that I didn't consider charismatic. And I love this photo here of a mourning cloak, which I found in one of the flower-filled meadows in Rocky Mountain National Park. Well, this is the last slide of my formal presentation. I do have one more slide, and I'll ask Diane to go ahead and put that up. At Woodend, we've been thinking a lot about what we can do given the current situation, given the divisions in the world, the community. What can we do to try to take a deeper, closer, more serious look at the role we play in the divisions in our culture right now, and the loss that is felt by all of us. So these are my thoughts, and I just want to share them. Ask you read them to yourself. We'll give you a few seconds to read it, and then I'll take questions on the slideshow.
We would like to remind the audience that you can ask your questions to Stephanie either by typing on the chat box or by unmuting yourself.
Stephanie, can I go first?
Sure.
I'm just wondering, of all the species that it's Claire, of all the species that you encountered in Rocky Mountain National Park, how many of them are really only, are there any that are only in the park itself or only in that area, or how widespread are some of these species?
Well, there are a couple of species that are species of concern in the state of Colorado. And then I think there are 3 species that are species of concern in Colorado. And it's because they're species that are more northerly in distribution. So Colorado is their southernmost, point. And then some of them are pretty typical central Rocky Mountain butterflies. So there aren't any, no endemics, in other words.
Okay.
No, there's nothing that's uber rare or endemic, but there are several species that are state concern.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Claire, some species, there are only 1 or 2 populations in the park because they're so habitat specific. So I would say they're sort of special because they have a specialized habitat.
Okay.
Even though they may be found in other places, it would be easy for them to decline if that particular habitat were impacted.
Janet Keg, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. You're such a good observer, do you see any differences in typical behavior between eastern and Rocky Mountain butterflies?
No, they just want a nectar. No, all butterflies want to eat. All butterflies want to get out of the rain. No, they may feed on different host plants, of course. So, for instance, the hoary kama that I showed a picture of that I said is a cousin to the eastern kama. The kamas in Rocky Mountain National Park in the west, they mostly feed on ribes or goose currants. But otherwise, they look and act the same. And nope, survival is what it's about.
Thank you.
Stephanie, I have some questions in the chat bar. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Stephanie?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. The polyp cube that you go through, that you set up, I'm trying to understand that some more. You pick an area that you just make that cube and that's where you stay in for the day, or you move and that cube moves with you?
That is the latter. Okay. As I move, the cube moves in front of me. I push the cube, essentially.
Okay, across your 1 kilometer.
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why if somebody comes to visit me, like I think when Claire, I don't know if she went out with me, I can't let you in my cube. Yeah. Because I have to keep moving my cube. And
hey man, get off my cube.
Stephanie, this is a question that I think is a good follow-up. I'm just going to read some questions from the chat bar, but could you just briefly describe a typical day when you're doing your research, from when you leave your cabin until you have those beers with your friends on the porch?
Well, so here's the thing. I get up early and I go and I make breakfast, and I always make a huge breakfast, like potatoes and frittata and, you know, because I can't survey until 10 o'clock. So everybody else has left the ranch by 7 o'clock because they are looking at plants and whatever, but I can't survey. So if I'm going to the west side of the park, which is 50 miles away, then I leave by 8 o'clock. I go up and over the Continental Divide. I can kill time a little, stop and look for bighorn sheep, look for golden eagles, because I can't start my transect till 10 o'clock.
Wow.
So, which is actually a little hard for me because I'm an early riser. But the other thing is, if I'm doing a transect close to where I'm staying, we have a voucher specimen collection. So the park gave us a permit early on to collect males and females of all, one male, one female of all the butterfly species in the park, except for any rare species, and there aren't that many rare. So we have 6 boxes of pinned specimens, and it's a voucher collection for study. And it's really significant. I study it all the time because there are 17 species of little blue butterflies. And unless you're really looking at a pinned specimen, because I can't collect and bring them in with me. Now I can take pictures. So now that I have a point and shoot camera, that's easier. But I spend a lot of time studying the specimens. I don't do enough data entry. I should be doing more data entry. Anybody else ever been a researcher and got behind on your data entry?
Someone was asking if are you grooming a successor researcher? Maybe you could get some of those grad students to do your data entry for you. And
well, that's true. Actually, the other researchers always want to go out with me because they think it's so much cooler to go out and look at butterflies than to measure plant growth. And it probably is a lot more fun, I would say. But the answer is no, but I'm gathering the data. So there's a good, hopefully a good 20-year data set that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, somebody can use.
This is interesting. So since you've been monitoring for so long and you get better, as you go along and you learn more, doesn't that affect your counts? And how do you account for that?
No, I don't think, it's true that what we did find out, we used to have more interns, but how do I say this? We found out that when they came out and joined us in June, there's so many butterflies for them to learn that they didn't know them till August, and then they left.
Yeah.
So we actually cut back on the number of interns. But I don't think so, because, there's so many variables. First of all, I'm not there, and I'm coming back in June, and I haven't seen the butterflies in a year. And then as soon as, a butterfly might fly for 3 weeks, and then by the time I'm like, oh yeah, that's what that little blue looks like, then the next little blue is flying. So the biggest variables really are wind and weather. Did it rain the night before? Did it hail the night before? Things like that. So I will write in my field notebook, heavy rain last night, because that'll probably explain why I saw only 10 butterflies instead of 40 butterflies. There are some things that are subjective. So,
are there any species that you used to see in your highest transect that have disappeared more recently?
Not disappeared. There is actually one species. It was a skipper called a Sonoran skipper, and it was on our transect on the west side of the park. It is uncommon in Rocky Mountain National Park. Actually, it's uncommon throughout Colorado. It's one of those that needs special habitat, so it's not it's never common anywhere. And we had not seen, so we had seen it last in 2010. So all these years I wasn't seeing it, but I never really thought it was probably gone. I figured it was probably just, the changes in weather, because the habitat hadn't changed that much. So, and one of the things we did learn early on is that one year you have a certain number of butterflies, the next year you don't see them. And instead of crying, the sky is falling, you have to wait till the next year, because we did that after 5 years. There was a species that had been really abundant. And then the 5th year, it crashed, and we were like, oh no. We really thought this species was a goner. Well, the next couple of years, it kept going back up, and now it's pretty much the most common blue species in the park. So I think it was just a response to a couple of years of drought, and it took that long for the species to build back up. But back to my Sonoran skipper, guess what? I saw it last year. So for the first time in 8 years, hadn't seen Sonoran skipper, but it was where it always was. It was nectaring on Colorado thistle. And if there's one butterfly, there are way more, because butterflies, its mom laid lots of eggs. And if one survived, there are way more. They're just not happening to cross my path. So I hope next year I'll see another one. I hope I keep seeing them, But we've actually learned not to panic when we don't see something one year, or even maybe, but that's, I think, the only one we didn't see for a period of time.
Well, Stephanie, when you look at like the long-term research, what is the thinking in the scientific community about the effects of climate change on the alpine butterflies? Like, do you think that changes are being observed from climate change?
Well, that's one of the reasons I really want to be back out there in July, because the majority of those, like the Magdalena alpine, the rock slide checker spot, the variable checker spot, the Melissa Arctic, they all fly in July, and I've been out there in July. We haven't monitored in July from 2011. So I think there could be significant changes, but I don't know. And I don't know who else is monitoring alpine butterflies in the US. I do know that in Spain, there was a 30-year study that showed something like 16 species of butterflies moved up at least 500 feet in elevation. But this is over a 30-year period. So there were tracked elevational changes over 30 years. So I really hope I'm out there in July, because some of these species I haven't seen since 2011, because I haven't been.
Yeah, you'll have to do another Naturalist Hour to update us on what you find in July, because now that
couldn't I?
There's two questions. If the tundra is so dry, where do the male butterflies puddle? And then also, how do the alpine butterflies overwinter? In what light?
Okay, first of all, not all male butterflies puddle, all right? But there are certainly rocks that are shaped like a cup, and it rains. So, and there are marmots and pikas and elk up there that urinate all over the rocks. And really, that's what the butterflies want. They want that uric acid. So if there's a rock where there's been a frequent marmot, it will have all this orange lichen growing. And if it rains and creates a little puddle, there's a perfect puddling area for alpine butterflies. And then the question, where do they winter? Or how do they overwinter?
Yeah, how do the alpine butterflies overwinter?
Some as eggs, some as caterpillars, some as adults. Like the Rocky Mountain Parnassian, actually, it's down in rock crevices, and it typically wraps itself up in something approximating a cocoon, more moth-like. That's probably to keep it from drying out as much as anything. So between all those rocks, there are deep crevices, and so they can pretty much quite easily get below the freeze line.
Do you have a list of all the Rocky Mountain National Park butterflies?
I do.
Maybe we could send that out to everyone along with your talk. Thanks.
Sure.
Does anyone else have any questions? You could unmute yourself if you had a quick question. Maybe we could do one more. No? All right. Well, then I'm sure you will all join me in wishing Stephanie safe travels and a wonderful summer. And please come back and update us in the fall.
All right. All right. I will do that. Yeah, nice to see everybody. I miss you all incredibly.
I miss you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm working in my attic.
Oh my God.
Phew.
Wow. Thank you, Stephanie.